On this day, the 29th of December, 1940, the Second Great Fire of London broke out as a result of a massive German bombing campaign over the city of London. Since the war had started, London had been a target for bombings. During the initial part of the war, bombings had not taken place. At this point, Germany was hoping to achieve peace, and bombings were seen as going beyond what was reasonable. After the fall of France, however, the Battle of Britain began. Initially, population points and cities were avoided, but once the Battle of Britain had been won, the Germans decided to start a bombing campaign to terrify and demoralize the people of Britain. The bombings began in September, so just over a year after the war had begun. They targeted first industrial areas, but industrial areas back then usually had their people living nearby. Many thousands were going to die, but then it became more indiscriminate, bombing cities just for the sake of bombing. So, the Second Great Fire of London, as it was described by reporters, was in the City of London, which is not all of London. It's not Westminster, so the area around Parliament and Buckingham Palace, that wasn't bombed. It wasn't industrial areas. The City of London is a small territory, they call it the square mile, the ancient Roman city of Londinium. And it's within the old Roman walls that this city lies. It is the financial centre of Europe right now, one of the great financial centres of the world, and even back then it was. So it wasn't heavily populated by residents. They only came during the day. So it would have been at this time not very full of people, and it's attested to by the fact that only 160 people died during this massive attack. And if you compare it to the first attack, which happened in the East End, it was something over 2,000 were killed in that attack, because people lived around the docks and around the factories and the port facilities. But here, people didn't really live here. Not many anyway. At the very centre of the City of London is St. Paul's Cathedral. And it was going to have a very interesting night, one that it almost didn't survive. The attack began just after 6 p.m. on the 29th of December. It would continue until 4 a.m. So a sustained assault upon the city. It was one of the most destructive raids during the Blitz, although, as I said, it did not kill as many of the other bombing campaigns. And it was called the Second Great Fire of London by many journalists because the area affected was greater than the original Great Fire of London in 1666, which destroyed most of the city at the time. Up to 100,000 bombs fell on the city, which is incredible to think about. 136 bombers dropped many incendiary bombs, mostly incendiaries, upon the city. 1,500 fires were started. Many office buildings, churches, government buildings, and even a few homes, factories, wharves were burnt out. Firefighters on the night were hampered by a water shortage caused by a damaged water main because of the bombing. The Thames also was at a low tide, so it was very difficult to get water out of the river. And at the time it was windy, so the fires were spread from building to building. 12 of the 160 killed were actually firefighters. 250 firefighters were injured in some way. St. Paul's Cathedral itself was very lucky. 28 incendiary bombs fell on and into St. Paul's. However, Winston Churchill had ensured that there would be a fire crew within the cathedral at all times. And they had also done this in the First World War because of the Zeppelins. Because St. Paul's is such an important image, symbol to the country, you couldn't allow that to be destroyed. So every night throughout the Blitz, there were people in St. Paul's ready to defend it if they needed to. And they did their job this night. 28 of those, and it did little damage to the cathedral. In fact, the next morning, when the sun rose and the fires were still burning, through the clouds of smoke, people could see the dome of St. Paul's standing above the city. It was still there. After the fire, after the bombings, and after the terror of the night before, what was left was a ruined city. St. Paul's stood high and untouched above the ruins. All around it were fields of rubble, blackened walls standing by themselves, roofless houses, shops that were gutted, churches that were destroyed. And this was the great city of London. It was gone, most of it. 160 people had been killed. 250 firemen themselves had been injured. Publishers had been destroyed as well. 20 publishing houses had been completely destroyed, losing 5 million books during the fires. Many of these publishing houses ended up closing because everything they had been destroyed. Many old bookshops as well had been destroyed. There had been a large book market in the city of London. And what else would happen? Well, it didn't do anything. The Germans, they dropped their bombs. They destroyed 5 million books and killed some people and destroyed a lot of buildings. But it didn't bring Britain to the table. It didn't convince anyone to surrender. In fact, it probably just made them more resolved to fight. And so this was the Second Great Fire of London on the 29th of December 1940. If you like these videos, come back for more tomorrow. Like, subscribe and comment.